Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you all for joining us for our kick-off session to officially launch the Enterprise Ireland Net Zero UK campaign. I'll explain a bit more about our campaign and provide an overview of today's session shortly. But first, I would like to ask Enterprise Ireland CEO, Leo Clancy, to open today's session with an introduction. Leo, over to you.
Thanks, Dara. Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining Enterprise Ireland at this very important event. I'm in my fourth week as CEO, and it's a pleasure and a privilege to be here. My top priority as CEO is the success of our clients in building their businesses and accessing market opportunities. The UK is our biggest market and our closest neighbour, and therefore hugely important to me as I settle into my new role. In that context, I'd like to welcome clients of EI, partners, and especially our panelists who have given your time to be part of this event. I'm really excited to hear the discussion and would like to congratulate the team that put this event together. The UK is evolving as it settles into its new position outside the EU. The trading relationship is only one aspect of a very complex set of dynamics impacting businesses and sectors in our nearest neighbour. These include accelerated shifts in action to address sustainability, digitalisation, global capacity, and supply chain issues. Now, Net Zero UK is an initiative led by Enterprise Ireland's team in the UK, focused on climate action and on the pivotal role it's playing in how businesses and sectors are adjusting and transforming. The change has already begun. Industries are adjusting now, and we must assume that the pace of transformation will accelerate. Even if some UK customers and partners have yet to fully communicate how they will act or how they want their supply chains to act, we can be sure that they're at least in planning stage, and these plans will impact Irish exporters serving their needs. So taking a proactive approach to understanding the parts of the market that will diminish and disappear, those that will grow and emerge, as well as the new behaviours and expectations of our customers or the customer's customer in a complex supply chain is absolutely vital. And I am delighted that Enterprise Ireland is leading and delivering the insights that you need to plan and future-proof your business. The event today will provide an overview of UK ambitions, and the UK is ambitious in this regard, and how UK business is responding to this. Later in the week, a series of Net Zero UK webinars focused on sectors including construction, energy, local authorities, and agriculture will be looked at in more detail. As always, we're interested in your views and feedbacks. Over the coming month and in the months to come and years to come, the Net Zero UK campaign will share more insights through podcasts, webinars, and reports, and will also identify ways of introducing Irish capability to UK customers. In Enterprise Ireland, we work as one team. Alongside delivering critical market insights, we've developed a suite of products under our Climate Action Fund to assist you in assessing your carbon footprint and developing a sustainability plan that reduces that footprint. While this may introduce important efficiencies into your business, a key consideration is that customers are also increasingly, as I mentioned earlier, researching how their suppliers and partners are contributing positively or negatively to their own carbon zero goals. So taking action, having a plan towards reducing your carbon footprint is increasingly important from a selling proposition perspective. And I'd encourage everyone on the webinar to engage following this in how Enterprise Ireland can help you with that. So I'd like to keep the comments brief. Thank you again to clients for your participation, to panelists and to Enterprise Ireland's team in the UK and Ireland involved in the Net Zero UK initiative and the Climate Action team. I encourage you all to stay involved in this important initiative, and thank you very much for your time. And hand back over to you, Dara. Thank you.
Thank you, Leo. And good afternoon again, everyone. I'm Dara Cotter, a senior market advisor with Enterprise Ireland in our London office. As Leo alluded to, the net zero and sustainability agenda is likely to become the dominant business consideration of the next 5, 10, 20, and even 30 plus years. So this is a campaign, as Leo rightly said, with no end in sight. By keeping Irish companies up to speed on UK market changes, we hope that you will be able to align your environmental and sustainability activities and strategy to those of your UK customers and potential customers. For the initial phase of our Net Zero UK campaign, we will focus on a number of sectors. They are construction, energy, local authorities and agriculture. We will delve into more detail in sectoral sessions taking place over the rest of this week, and I will share more details on those at the end of the webinar. For now, though, we're going to focus on the wider UK ambition to decarbonise the economy and reach net zero emissions. We will be taking a look at some of the wider policy drivers, as well as some of the pressures coming from corporate and investment stakeholders that will require an appropriate response from the supply chain. Again, I'd like to sincerely thank today's speakers for their involvement in this session. We've put together an expert panel who between them can speak to the fundamental changes underway and ahead of us across the UK's policy, corporate and investment spheres. I will shortly hand you over to Anna Musat, Head of Policy with the Aldersgate Group. Anna will take us through some of the key measures that will be required for a comprehensive UK net zero strategy and what that might mean for business. After Anna's overview presentation, we will kick off our panel discussion. I will invite each of the panelists to introduce themselves before we start that discussion, but just to briefly say, joining us today, we have, as I said, Anna Musat, Head of Policy at the Aldersgate Group, Ida Levine, Board Director and Lead Expert on Policy and Regulation at the Impact Investing Institute, Amy Jenkins, Head of Clean Growth at the UK's Department for Business, Enterprise and Industrial Strategy, and finally, Niall Campion, Founder and Managing Director of Frey, who are an Enterprise Ireland client company. Following that panel discussion, Kathleen O'Regan of Enterprise Ireland's Operational Excellence team will provide an overview of EI's climate enterprise supports, including our new €10 million Climate Enterprise Action Fund, which is designed to help Irish SMEs implement a sustainability strategy and decarbonise their own business activities. Some housekeeping: if you have any questions for the panelists during our discussion, you can submit these via the questions tab on the sidebar of GoToWebinar, and we'll do our best to relay these in the discussion. For now, though, I'll hand you over to Anna for an update on the UK's net zero trajectory. Anna, thank you very much, and the floor is yours.
Great, thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. Lovely to be here at the launch of this important initiative, because you're right, I think the landscape for businesses has already changed dramatically with the net zero target being set in law, and it will continue to do so as the policy context evolves. So what I hope to talk to you about today is just what achieving the net zero target means for businesses and how the policy landscape has evolved and how it still needs to evolve in order to support this. So if we could go over to the next slide, please. Just to briefly introduce myself, I am the Head of Policy at Aldersgate Group. A really brief introduction to Aldersgate Group for those of you who don't know us. We are an alliance of progressive businesses, NGOs and universities. We're based in the UK, but we work with members who have an international presence. The gist of what our membership believes is basically that ambitious climate and environmental regulation makes sense not just for cutting emissions and decarbonising the economy, but also for achieving sustainable prosperity, creating jobs and driving innovation. So as you can see, we work with a multitude of businesses, and we work very closely with them to develop our policy solutions. And I'm going to be talking about some of those in relation to net zero in the coming minutes. So if we flick over to the next slide, please. Just briefly wanted to touch on the context for achieving net zero, because obviously it's a momentous change for businesses. And especially in the past year with the pandemic going on, there was a lot of talk about the opportunities entailed in the transition to net zero. And of course, there are really important opportunities included as part of this. First of all, you will all have heard quite a lot about the levelling up potential and the job creation aspect of the transition to a low carbon economy. And that's actually really true. There's a lot of jobs that stand to be created by decarbonising sectors. So if you just look at the power sector, estimates say that there's around 108,000 new jobs that could be created by transitioning to net zero. But also in other sectors of the economy, if we think about all the charging infrastructure that we need to deploy, all the remanufacturing and circular economy opportunities involved, that already means quite a lot in terms of job creation and jobs that are regionally dispersed. And likewise, there are really important opportunities in terms of innovation and competitiveness for businesses who move quickly on this agenda and capture a share of that market. As more countries take on net zero targets, the advice that they can give, the services and products they can export will be in growing demand. But that doesn't mean to say there aren't challenges in the transition, as I'm sure all of you will have thought about this. Different sectors are on very different pathways in getting to net zero. And the reason why that's still the case is because some of them are dependent on some technologies that aren't quite yet mature in order to decarbonize. So manufacturing is an important example in this sense, with carbon capture and storage and hydrogen still to be deployed at scale. And of course, retrofitting existing assets and replacing infrastructure to make it net zero compatible comes with really high capital expenditures. If we could go over to the next slide, I've just included a brief graph that shows the discrepancy in emission cuts that have been achieved by different sectors in a period of 5 years. So this is based on the CCC's calculations. You can see that the power sector has made pretty impressive gains, whereas emissions in the surface transport, for example, have slightly gone up. Now, if we go to the next slide, I briefly wanted to talk about some of the existing policy commitments, because the good news is that the government is moving quite quickly on this agenda. And especially with COP26 coming up at the end of the year, there's still quite a lot of policy announcements in support of net zero that are due to come out. I've just picked out a few of the strategies that have been published recently, including the 10-point plan, the energy white paper, and the industrial decarbonization strategy, which have made some really important commitments in support of reaching net zero across a number of different sectors of the economy. So you can see those on the right-hand side there. I'm not going to read them out for you, but I think what's really important to say is that we have some targets and we have some important commitments for different sectors, but what we need now are roadmaps to get to those targets and reach that destination, certainty for businesses on how we're going to get there and what sort of investment decisions they can make over the next few years. And we also need a plan to bring all of those strands together and make sure that the whole economy decarbonizes in a cost-effective way and at pace. So if we move to the next slide, please. I briefly wanted to talk about what's needed from a net zero strategy, because as all of you know, the government will publish a net zero strategy ahead of COP26 and is meant to do exactly some of those things that I've talked about. My presentation today also draws on a report that Aldersgate Group has published in October 2019, so fairly recently, and the cover is included there on the right-hand side, which talks about what is needed in order to transition the whole economy to net zero and what are some of the policy decisions needed across different sectors. At a high level, something that we've heard from a lot of our business members and other businesses that we've engaged as part of this is that really the private sector hopes that the net zero strategy will provide some sectoral pathways with clear timetables for the introduction of regulations, market mechanisms, and policies, so they can plan effectively and anticipate those in their business decisions. And also support for innovation and skills investment, because those will be really important for all sectors of the economy. So if we move on to the next slide, the way that we've divided our report is we've talked about so-called low regret sectors and hard to abate sectors. The low regret sectors are the ones where we kind of know what needs to be done in order to get to net zero. The technologies that we depend on are fully mature and have been trialed at scale. And so what's missing is just having the right policies in place and the right market mechanisms. So sectors like this include the power sector, buildings, surface transport, and waste. And we touch on all of them in the report. So what we now need to see in order to progress the decarbonization journey of these sectors is introduction of smart regulations, some incentives, and some targeted infrastructure spending to cut emissions. So on the next slide, I give an overview of some of the policy recommendations that we make in relation to all of these sectors. And because this was published in October 2019, some of these have already been delivered, which is great news and gives you an indication of the pace of progress. But I'll just touch on some of them. For example, in the power sector, it's great to see that more mature renewables will be brought onto the grid, with onshore wind now included in the CFD auctions. But I think we need a better consenting regime for developing grid infrastructure to make sure that it can support the increased levels of electrification that we're going to see over the next few years. Likewise, in the transport sector, really good signal to bring forward a ban on the sale of petrol and diesel cars to 2030. However, we still want to see the publication of the transport decarbonization plan, which is going to take an integrated view of the transport sector and consider how emissions can be cut across all modes of transport, including rail and buses, to make sure that customers can make the most emission efficient choices when it comes to transportation. In the built environment and waste, I think those are two sectors where progress has been a bit slower. For example, in the built environment, we've seen the Green Homes Grant being scrapped quite quickly, and lack of demand, which is plaguing this sector. The rolling out of minimum energy efficiency standards for all buildings could really help drive this demand, help grow the supply chain, and encourage businesses to invest in skills for retrofits and energy efficiency. And likewise, in the waste sector, we've seen some really important commitments from government, but they haven't actually been followed through with concrete policy measures. So, for example, the rollout of extended producer responsibility schemes would be a really good way to progress action in this area and cut emissions further. If we now go to the next slide, please. I'm going to be talking a little bit about the hard to abate sectors. So some of those sectors include manufacturing, shipping, aviation, agriculture as well. And basically these are sectors where some of the technologies required to cut emissions have not been trialed at scale. Examples include, as I've mentioned, carbon capture and storage and hydrogen. And likewise, without these technologies, it will be impossible for them to get to absolute zero. And so to support these sectors to decarbonize, continued funding and support for large-scale trials of these technologies will be important, but also support for developing the right business models so that private investment could come in and complement what's already being offered by government. And other mechanisms to mobilize private finance and plug that funding gap include product standards that gradually drive down the permissible level of embodied carbon in materials like steel or aluminium, and supportive procurement rules that grow the demand for low carbon products. So moving on to the next slide, I wanted to briefly touch on the issue of carbon pricing, which is absolutely critical for the hard to abate sectors, but also for the economy, for a net zero economy more widely, because we need to pay the true price for the carbon that we're emitting. And historically, under the EU ETS, the price has been sometimes very low due to some flaws in the design of the scheme. So we really need to have a carbon pricing trajectory that is aligned with net zero. And it's really good to hear a commitment from government to do that through the UK emissions trading scheme. What we'd like to see is a price of around £40 per tonne of CO2 in the 2020s. So it's already fairly close to that, which is good news. But this needs to rise to around £100 per tonne of CO2 in the 2050s. We also want to see the number of free allocations going down gradually for different sectors, obviously allowing businesses to adjust, so not cutting them all of a sudden, but gradually reducing those and having a clear roadmap for that. To enable businesses to remain competitive as part of that, the introduction of carbon border adjustment mechanisms that enable businesses to compete on a level playing field will likewise be very important. And of course, over time, ensuring that more sectors are covered by the UK ETS will be important so that, again, the whole economy can decarbonize in tandem. And if we go over to the next slide, which is also my last one, I just wanted to briefly touch on some cross-economy tools for getting to net zero. Because in addition to the sector-specific policy decisions that we need to take, we also need to consider the broader context. So first of all, just briefly touching on trade and climate diplomacy, COP26 has been an amazing year for really galvanizing climate ambition and action on the domestic front. And it's really important to use the domestic example to persuade others to be more ambitious on climate. We could use the negotiations for a number of things. One priority could be persuading other countries to align their economic recovery packages with the net zero goal and to unlock adaptation funding. And with trade policy now being in UK's hands, there's significant opportunity to make sure that in trade agreements, barriers for low carbon goods and services are removed, tariffs are lowered to really enable a thriving market to grow there. Green finance is, again, another really important aspect which will enable decarbonization across sectors. There is no way that government can meet the whole spending demand for that, and businesses are very willing to play their part. Some really good news were the introduction of the creation of the Green Sovereign Bond in the UK and the UK Infrastructure Bank, which will play a key role in crowding in some of that private finance in areas where we've seen market failures, such as home retrofits, or de-risking some of those early stage investments in technologies like hydrogen, for example. And again, the net zero strategy that we are going to see at the end of the year will be really important for mobilizing private finance, hopefully providing that clear roadmap that can offer certainty to investors. And finally, just wanted to touch on the topic of skills. A lot of sectors that need to transition to net zero are already seeing skills shortages, and the construction sector is always mentioned as an example in this sense. Because we need to change the way that we produce and the way that we think about doing things, of course, these skill shortages will exacerbate. First of all, we need to make sure that we have people that can install heat pumps versus gas boilers. We need to have technicians that can maintain EVs and many other examples like that. So the Aldersgate Group has historically been asking for the implementation of a national skills strategy that embeds sustainability across all levels of the educational system. So not just higher education, but also further education and apprenticeships, and making sure there's a really strong connection between what employers need, what we need to achieve a net zero economy in the longer term, and what we teach students. So I'll stop there, but very happy to take any questions during the panel. Thank you very much.
Anna, many thanks for that. That was a really concise overview of where the UK market is at the moment and the overall direction of travel. To do so in just over 10 minutes isn't an easy ask, so thank you. I'd now just like to invite our other panelists to turn on their microphones and their cameras so that we can begin our panel discussion. Should have everyone? Yes, great. So before we kick off properly, can I just ask each of you to provide a short introduction to yourself and your organisation? Anna, we've already heard from you, so perhaps Ida, would you like to go next?
Sure, and thank you very much for having me today. My name is Ida Levine. I'm a board director at the Impact Investing Institute, and I come from a financial services background. I was previously the European Council for the Capital Group. The Institute is a relatively recent addition. We were founded in December 2019 with cornerstone funding from the UK government, the City of London, and a number of key top financial firms. Our chair is Dame Elizabeth Corley. The chair of the advisory committee is Sir Harvey McGraw, and our CEO is Sarah Gordon, who's the former business editor of the FT. I'm the lead expert on policy and regulation. We're joined by a strong board and advisory board of NEDs and experts in other areas. Our vision is for lives to improve as more people choose to use their savings and investments to help social and environmental challenges, as well as seeking a financial return. And our mission is to accelerate the growth and improve the effectiveness of the impact investing market in the UK and internationally.
Great, thank you, Ida. Niall, would you like to go next, please?
Sure, yeah. So my name is Niall Campion. I'm Managing Director of Ray. And as a company, we make data-driven virtual reality simulation training. So that means we combine VR headsets with data capture, cloud storage to improve training outcomes in the industry we work in. Typically, we're working in what we call high hazard industries. One of those will be offshore wind, which I'm sure we're going to talk a little bit about later. But I guess the main reason we were asked to be on the call is that we're an Enterprise Ireland client company. So we've been lucky to be supported by Enterprise Ireland for maybe the last 3 years through investment. And as part of our last investment round, we adopted a B Corporation constitution. So from the start, we've set up the company to focus not just on profit, but on people and planet as the way we measure our success. And so we were backed by Enterprise Ireland. We're the first Enterprise Ireland company to have that B Corporation constitution. And so we work for stakeholder value as opposed to shareholder value.
Excellent, thanks, Niall. And lastly, Amy, hi. Would you like to just give a brief introduction as well, please?
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. Hi, everybody. Just to echo, I think the thanks for inviting me along today. My name's Amy Jenkins. I'm Deputy Director in our UK Department for Business Innovation and Industrial Strategy. And there, effectively, I kind of work in our Clean Growth Directorate, which is the hub of our sort of working across Whitehall on our UK domestic targets, and in particular, achieving our net zero target. And I think, Dara, at some point, very happy, I think, sort of building on the fantastic presentation we've had from Anna to give a bit of a sense of sort of that look ahead to the net zero strategy and obviously what's to come.
Great, I think that actually makes sense, Amy. So perhaps we'll start there with our panel discussion. Maybe you'd like to give an update on the net zero policy and strategy that Anna referenced in her presentation, and maybe give us an idea of what we could expect to see in the strategy that's, I think, due to be published before COP26 in November, and anything else that might be of relevance particularly over the next year or two.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think to do that, I might also just sort of reference some of the things. I won't sort of repeat what Anna has already said, but one or two of the obviously policies and strategies that we've published in the past 8 to 6 months or so, because actually much of what the net zero strategy will do will be to bring together all these sort of sectoral plans and different policies and make sense of them as one whole in terms of that plan towards meeting both our net zero target in the UK, but also our sequential carbon budgets, which are our interim UK climate targets on the way. So what I think I'll just briefly cover sort of 3 elements, which is just to sort of recap on the UK's requirements. 2, as I say, what policies we've announced, and then how we'll bring that all together in the net zero strategy. So actually, I think the exciting news is of today, actually, we've been through our parliamentary process and we've actually now set in law our 6th carbon budget. So that effectively takes us out to 2035 in effect. It sort of lies between 2033 and 2037 in the UK as a cap on our sort of greenhouse gas emissions. So that's set at a 78% reduction on 1990 levels by 2035. Obviously, we also set at the end of last year our NDC under the Paris Agreement. So that's a sort of 68% reduction on 1990 levels by 2030. So those are our 2 interim steps, as it were. There are a couple of others besides, but that's on our pathway to meeting that net zero target by 2050. And I'm sure Anna may have mentioned this, but at the moment we're on a 44% reduction. I know that Anna really helpfully ran you through the fact that actually it's quite a kind of mixed picture in terms of where those emission reductions have come from. We've seen a really stark reduction in the power sector, but there are some other sectors such as buildings and transport where there's been less in the way of greenhouse gas emissions reductions in the near term, and they're kind of going to be some of the focus of the upcoming strategy. And then in terms of what we have announced, so the starting gun and what's been a really intense period of policy development leading up to COP26 was really that 10-point plan that I think Anna referenced at the end of last year. So this is very much an initiative by the Prime Minister. It's about accelerating the UK on its course to net zero, but also actually doing that in a way that we kind of drive near-term jobs creation. I'll come on to how that was, and also sort of start to think about how the UK can build kind of industries of the future, looking at the trade opportunities. We know that some of these markets and low carbon solutions, energy efficiency are going to be really sizable as other countries underneath the Paris Agreement come forward with their equivalent NDCs and obviously their plans as well. So in terms of what was in the 10-point plan, I think you've had a bit of a flavour of that. I mean, I think just to, for instance, Neil's point about sort of some of the areas, one was obviously offshore wind. So at the moment we've got around 40 gigawatts. We committed to quadruple that to 40 gigawatts. We also coupled it actually with investment in the sort of support infrastructure needed in the UK. So 160 million for integrated port infrastructure that we've actually been awarding over the course of this year. I think you've probably heard about the EVs. So we basically, in order to accelerate our path to electric vehicles across the UK, we brought forward that kind of target for phasing out conventional petrol and diesel cars to 2030 in effect, so that all cars sold from 2030 have to have kind of net zero capability, and obviously that's a sort of 100% electric vehicles in 2035. But we also coupled that with 1.3 billion, for instance, for the rollout of the infrastructure that's going to be needed, and also thought about how we're going to support industry transition. So we've kind of launched the Automotive Transformation Fund, which is an example of that. So that's a 10-point plan. We followed that up with the energy white paper, and I think there's loads of detail in there, but what it effectively does is sets out the challenges that we're going to have to nigh on double the amount of electricity we're using in the UK to cater for all that additional use by virtue and demand by virtue of electric vehicles. Also, heat pumps is one way to decarbonise our heat across the UK, but also do that in a way where we're decarbonising the grid entirely by 2050. I think you've heard about those hard to abate sectors, so we've had the industrial decarbonisation strategy and some of the sort of targets in that. And I guess this brings me on to kind of where we're heading next. So in line with that, kind of looking at the different sectors that we have, we're going to be sort of shortly bringing out, certainly ahead of the net zero strategy in the autumn, which will come just immediately before COP, a transport decarbonisation strategy. So I think Anna was talking about some of the things that many stakeholders had set out they'd like to see in that, but it will be more detail behind that sort of phase out date for conventional petrol diesel cars, also more detail on some of the other kind of areas of transport we have to decarbonise. We've also got a hydrogen strategy, so it's really interesting. You look at some of the sort of estimations of kind of what we're going to need in terms of hydrogen as a new low carbon energy vector. It's probably having a sort of a hydrogen sector that's probably the size of our electricity sector at the moment. So that's a huge amount of growth in the next kind of 30 years. And then you've also got this kind of key question about how are we going to fund all of this? You know, what will be the distribution of the costs? So our finance ministry, the Treasury at the moment, are looking at that question. We're going to have a net zero review out from them as well. And effectively kind of where we're heading to, as I say, in the autumn is a net zero strategy that brings together all those different sectoral plans, but also couples it with a lot of the cost-cutting enablers. So I think Anna picked up there at the end around skills. We've actually got a Green Jobs Task Force, which has been launched at the moment, which is looking at, you know, where are we expecting those jobs to be? What are going to be the skills need both in the long term and the short term? And actually, how do we meet that? Sort of how do we build on obviously the reforms that were announced by our education department in January, and actually have a kind of FE system and an education sector that's quite responsive to all these new low carbon skills that are going to be needed. So these are some of the things that are coming out, say, in advance of the net zero strategy. We'll bring it all together, set out those pathways, the policies and proposals to help support those pathways, and some of those cost-cutting enablers as well. But I probably talked for too long, so I'll hand back to you there.
No, that's really good. Thank you, Amy. I think we've got between yourself and Anna, we've got a really good idea, I think, of direction and travel in terms of policy. I think watch the space is the message in advance of COP. We're likely to see a lot of those sectoral pathways that Anna referenced emerge, and a lot more of the detail maybe in terms of how those hard to abate sectors will actually decarbonise and reduce their emissions. So that's the policy. I'm keen to kind of move on to the corporate commitments to net zero, and then maybe after that we can touch on the investment perspective. But maybe, Anna, if I just go back to you briefly. So the members of the Audit Group, I think, have a market capitalisation between them of over 550 billion, I think it is, pounds. So clearly these are very large industry players. Are you seeing a growing appetite amongst large corporates to actively contribute to the net zero agenda? Are we likely to see more and more large corporates embedding sustainability at the heart of their business, do you think?
Yes, I think that's completely right. Actually, our members are some of the leaders in their sector, so that's how we decide to work with them. But they've had commitments to net zero even before the target was put into law back in 2019. So that's really impressive. I think a lot of businesses are actually seeing some of the synergies between adopting a net zero target, cutting emissions, and profitability, increased innovation, and becoming more competitive in the longer term. So I think the business case is definitely there, and it's something that a lot of these businesses are embracing. As I've mentioned before, I think what we need to do next is make sure that we have that regulatory framework in place and the policies to make sure that the laggards go there as well. And also, let's not forget about the SMEs and some of those smaller organizations that maybe don't have as many resources available to them to be thinking about these issues and really making sure that they're supported as well in the transition.
Yeah, great. That's actually a nice segue into Niall. I think, Niall, that planet and profit link that Anna kind of referenced there, large corporates have seen them being intrinsically linked and two sides of the same coin effectively. VRAI are one of Ireland's few, at the moment anyway, certified B corporations. Can you just briefly explain what that means and why you felt it was an important step for the company? Is it a response to, you know, the wider organizational goals of your customers or your potential customers?
Yeah, and like maybe to pick up on a few things that Anna said as well. But I should probably clarify that we're not formally B Corp certified yet. We're in the queue. We've been in the queue for the past, I think, 8 months. I guess it's a good indication of the direction of travel that I think B Corporation have been overwhelmed in the last year with the amount of companies who've applied for certification. Like resourcing is obviously, Anna touched on it there as well. Like as an SME, like it's like where you focus your attention is always the key factor. And this is something we've chosen to put resources into. And we've been, as I said at the start, fortunate that EI have backed us in that. But maybe to go back to your actual question, which is what does it mean? And it's about, I guess, adopting a framework for how you make your company more sustainable. And I guess it's sustainability with either a big or a small s, but not the sort of like, we're not making, as a product, we're not making a sustainable product necessarily. But we have chosen to run our company in a sustainable way, which means that like we're not actively out pursuing profit at all costs. Like I said at the start, we focus our effort on people, planet, and profit, and that's how we measure our success. So, like the way it manifests itself in the business is, like very early on, we set in the people context a really strong gender balanced target. So we said by the time we get to 10 people, we want to have a 50-50 gender split in the company. And so that's something we achieved. And then we have another, when we get to 30, we have a similar target, which is gender split and also diversity. So not just everyone coming from the same background. And again, Anna touched on it there, like it's not just about doing the right thing, although like for us, that's a big factor. There is a very strong business case to this too. Because like, you know, I think it's pretty common knowledge that like diverse teams make better decisions. That has been proven in the research. And so that's the business case that we can make to our investors for why this makes sense to us as a strategy. And then like from the planet side, I guess it's the one we probably struggle the most with, but like maybe an anecdote for how it manifests itself in the company is that like every week we have our company catch up, obviously across the whole company. And it's something we talk about every week. So like, how are we going to be more sustainable next week, or what have we done this week that has, you know, been a sustainable action? And that can be small things like, you know, someone at home in lockdown is saying they're making their own candles. So like that's a small action they're taking. Or like I've started feeding the birds in my backyard and I'm spending I think €30 a week on bird food. But on a more bigger sort of company policy approach, like one of the developers who does all our cloud stuff, when he was deciding which cloud provider to go with, you know, we're picking the one that is targeting net zero by 2030, which is Microsoft. But also then as he's setting up the servers, he set it up in a way that means the servers that we're on only run when we need them. They're not running 24 hours a day, which is probably our biggest emission would come from cloud data storage. And so it's like, I guess it's, as we talk about it as a culture in the company, the individual decisions people make all contribute to our sort of sustainability goal. I feel like we've been talking for a long time, so I'm just going to stop there at the end of it.
No, that's great, Niall. I think that's an important anecdote there, or reference in terms of the procurement decisions that you're actually making internally already. I think it's fair to say that will be reflected or replicated down the supply chain as well. Ida, thanks very much for joining us, and appreciate the patience before we got to you. So obviously you're an expert on green impact investment and the kind of changing decision-making process of investors. Would you be able to tell us, well, what is impact investing and why it's important within the context of the net zero challenge?
I can. So impact investing has 3 key features. The first thing is it's intentional. So an investor goes out to try to achieve a particular outcome. And that can be a reduction in carbon in the atmosphere, in a product, or in a process. The second thing is we're looking for positive outcomes that are measurable, and we're looking for reporting. There's lots of concern around greenwashing. We start out in a very pure way, looking in an investment to make an impact and to make sure we're measuring that properly and there's reporting from the issuer or company. And then finally, impact investing does contemplate a financial return. It's not philanthropy.
Yeah.
There is market impact investing where there's a market return, but there's also below market impact investing where some investors are willing to invest and get less than a market return or even lose part of their capital in order to be catalytic or to achieve a particular outcome. So that in a nutshell is what impact investing is. So I'll give you an example that I've seen recently, a process that has been developed to make concrete with 50% less emissions. It can be measured in a very concrete way, no pun intended. And also, you can require the issuer to report and know exactly what outcome you are achieving. So that would be an impact investment that is in the net zero space.
That's a great example. Can I ask you, how quickly are things changing at the moment with respect to impact and green investing? You know, what do you think companies and corporates and indeed institutional investors need to prepare, do you think, for the change that's underway and the further change that we're likely to see in this space?
I think it is, the market is growing. The market for ESG in its broadest sense is growing very, very rapidly. Impact investing is a type of ESG investing. As I said, it's more focused, more intentional. There's a real premium on additionality, the fact that the investment is going to give you some outcome that takes you further towards net zero. But we're seeing more and more companies, as we've heard from Niall, who are looking to achieve goals that are attached to net zero. And more investors are looking to invest in those companies. So I think it really is growing. The ESG trend, I think, is growing even faster than impact investing. But then there's a lot of, they're very, very different ideas on what ESG investing is, whereas the impact investing, as I've said, is very clear, but it's growing.
Yeah, thanks, Ida. On ESG, actually, and I might just go back to you for a moment. Do you think there is broad agreement amongst UK corporates and amongst maybe some of your members that ESG considerations need to be at the heart of their strategies? Are you kind of seeing large businesses, large corporates starting to incorporate or build ESG considerations into their buying decisions and their procurement practices? Is that a trend that we're seeing and we're likely to see more of?
Sorry, I just muted myself there. Yes, I think that's definitely a trend that we've been observing, and I think part of the reason behind it is, first of all, as you know, we now have climate-aligned disclosures being made mandatory from 2025. A lot of businesses had already been disclosing even before that, and I think because these need to get board approval, it really requires businesses to take a closer look at how climate risk is embedded in their decisions and in the investments that they make. This knowledge is socialized across the wider business, so inevitably that will lead to some behavioural change down the line. And I think the government is also talking about looking at nature-related disclosures further down the line. So again, I think there's all these layers that businesses are adding into the way that they factor in how they spend their money and what they choose to invest in. Likewise, I think the public pressure on investors has really increased. We've seen more people asking for their pension funds to be aligned to be invested in Paris-aligned funds, which is something that we weren't seeing as much of maybe 5-10 years ago. So I think it's really a combination of factors, and I think this pressure is set to grow as we approach 2050.
Great, thank you. Now that might bring me back to you again in terms of you know, supply chain perspective and what you're seeing from customers and potential customers, are you seeing some of those pressures coming on you? Pressures to showcase your sustainability commitments. Is it important, or has it been important for Vray to align your own environmental strategies with those of the customers? Are you seeing changes on the procurement front as well?
Like, I guess generally the answer to all that is yes. Yeah. I would say probably, like, again, for us, like, it wasn't necessarily a business decision. Like, we didn't sort of say, well, we want to be more sustainable because it's going to win us more business. It was more like a personal interest from myself and Pat, my co-founder. Like, we were interested in how do we run a business in a way that's different to sort of the pure shareholder value profit model. I think maybe it's just because we're maybe contrary as well, that we just like this idea of a different way of running a business. But like, we're actually seeing the impact of it with customers. So like a lot, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, we did it probably with Kingspan, who are obviously renowned as a sort of sustainable company. And it was like kind of shocking to see the amount of documentation we had to fill out around, you know, different supply chain things that they were asking us for. But when it came to actually, we could answer them all because we had done the work for the B Corp application. And then more recently, we're doing a project with a Norwegian company, and it was the same. Like, they explicitly asked us for sustainability credentials around, you know, doing the project. And I should probably say, like, they're a defense company, so it's not like they're even specifically a green company. And I guess that's maybe part of my message on this call is, like, we don't necessarily make hugely sustainable products. Like, it's not our product that's sustainable, but it's more like with the B Corp status, you achieve a score based on various processes that you've implemented in your company, and like, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're making a purely sustainable product, I guess. And one other thing there to say on market forces, but it's gone. It'll come back to me, I'm sure.
No problem. Thanks, Niall. I think that gives us a good glimpse into, you know, some of the requirements that supply chain companies such as yourselves and SMEs are starting to see. Ida, just maybe back to you again, in terms of in the investment space. Are the E and the S, so the environmental and the social within that ESG, are they receiving equal focus from investors, do you think, or is there a ranking of priority? Are we seeing, for example, that the environmental agenda, so the E becoming the major priority for investors, do you think?
Well, I think both are a priority, particularly after the pandemic. We've seen a lot more of an emphasis on the S. But I think because of the climate emergency, the E is probably of the most interest at the moment. And I think investors have woken up and they've realized what a task we have in front of us, and that they're part of the solution, and that they have to use the incentive that comes from investment to help us achieve the goals that are necessary to be able to, for the world to continue in the way it has. So I think the E is out there. I would, and above the S at the moment, but I don't think that they are separate. I think they're interlinked. And one thing we've been working at the Institute is we were involved in with the GFI in the Green Guild, Green Bond, and it's actually a Green Plus bond. And one of the things that HMT and DMO are working on is this concept of social co-benefits that support what is called a just transition. With the move to net zero, there will be a displacement of people, there will be jobs that are lost, there will be a need for reskilling, there will be a need for new infrastructure. And with this Green Plus and the addition of the reporting on the social co-benefits, there'll be a recognition of this need for a just transition and of the fact that there are social and economic factors that are very, very alive in the quest for to net zero, and for businesses that recognize the need for a reduction in carbon.
Absolutely, great point. I'm just looking at the time. I think we have a couple more minutes to the panel discussion. With that in mind, Amy, I might just go back to you again. I noticed last week that Lloyds Banking Group surveyed over 1,000 SMEs across the UK, and I think they found that 4 in 10 of them are unsure how the government's commitment to net zero by 2050 will affect them and how they might address the net zero agenda. Do you have any advice, or what can I ask you? What do businesses and SMEs need to do to contribute to the net zero objective? What advice might you give them?
Yeah, no, it's I'm not surprised by that finding, because I mean, one of the things that government's been doing in the run up to COP26 is trying to work as much as possible these broad coalitions, so really seeing the businesses. Somebody who I wanted to mention was Andrew Griffith, who's our UK net zero business champion, and he's been both working with larger kind of businesses and also SMEs under the Race to Zero, which is a UN initiative in the run up to COP26, and that's all basically about sort of companies getting more information about how they themselves can engage on climate change, set science-based targets, so actually perhaps the net zero target or something more intermediate, and then also look to decarbonise their activities, I think, in the way that sort of Niall's been describing. So actually we have just launched a new SME sort of digital hub, so that is definitely there and can be explored. I'd encourage everyone to go to the Race to Zero hub as well. There's been some fantastic work done by the International Chambers of Commerce to actually sort of set out how SMEs can decarbonise. I mean, there's a whole litany of things that you can do, everything from sort of going paperless to, turning down your heating by that 1 degree. And there's much more information on there besides. And I think this also goes back to sort of what we're going to be looking to do through the net zero strategy to kind of, understand how better kind of businesses can be supported. I think, as probably Anna said, it's incumbent on government to obviously set that framework, but then there's a lot of work that needs to happen. And actually just harking back to that conversation on sort of mobilising private investment into either be that low carbon innovation technologies we need or infrastructure. There's a big shift at the moment, and you will have seen actually our Chancellor's made a number of announcements around green finance. So Ida mentioned obviously the green gilt that's going to be kind of launched actually coming up very shortly in terms of sort of building on the announcement that will actually issue. And we've obviously had the UK Infrastructure Bank, where it's got 2 key objectives, one of which is net zero, the other being sort of, regional growth across the UK. But we've also been sort of working on taxonomy. Obviously the EU's got its green taxonomy, we're working up our own. And as Anna mentioned, we've obviously got that commitment to kind of actually across both the financial sector, but also large corporates, make it mandatory actually to think about those climate risks. Because there's that sort of benefit, as it were, I think, in terms of the push from consumers, even staff retention, on actually acting on climate change, but there's also the sort of making sure that businesses are sustainable, because ultimately we know that sort of the risks in climate change are really quite pronounced, and we know that we're going to be bringing forward successive policy in line with net zero strategy as well.
Great, Amy, that's excellent. Thanks for that very comprehensive answer. I think time is just about up for our discussion. I know that we could probably continue talking here for another hour or so, but I think we'll have to leave it there. I'd like to, on behalf of Enterprise Ireland, sincerely thank Ida, Amy, Anna and Niall for joining us today and providing us with your insights. Hopefully, as our Net Zero UK campaign progresses, there'll be future opportunities for extra contributions from you all. If you posted a question in the sidebar and we didn't get to it, we'll do our best to follow up with you directly. But for now, thank you again, Ida, Amy, Anna and Niall. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you. Thank you.
So now I'd just like to invite Kathleen O'Regan from our own Enterprise Ireland Operational Excellence team, who's going to join us to provide an overview of our climate action funding supports, which have been designed to help Irish companies decarbonise their own activities. So if there are any questions for Kathleen, again, please post them in the sidebar. If we have time, we'll cover them. If not, we'll follow up with you directly after the session. So Kathleen, over to you.
Thanks, Sarah, and good afternoon, everyone. So I'm an environmental advisor in Enterprise Ireland, and I'm just going to give you an overview of Enterprise Ireland's climate action funding supports. So the objectives of the supports is to help companies build internal capabilities to prepare for the low carbon, more resource efficient economy of the future, whether a company is starting out on their green journey or have already started. There are 3 main supports: the Climate Action Voucher, Green Start and Green Plus. And the supports are open to all Enterprise Ireland clients, whether it's an SME or a large company. So the Climate Action Voucher is a 100% funded grant to engage an expert from the Enterprise Ireland Directory of Green Service Providers for 2 days. The project cost is €1,800, which equates to €900 per day. And it's open to high potential startups, SMEs, and large companies. The Green Directory of service providers can be downloaded from the Enterprise Ireland website. So eligible activities under the Climate Action Voucher must include one of the following activities: resource efficiency assessment, renewable energy potential, introduction to corporate sustainability, or introduction to circular economy. Under resource efficiency assessment, resources can include energy, water, and materials. The main outcome of the 2-day resource efficiency assessment will be a register of opportunities. So the green service provider will identify resource, emissions, and cost-saving opportunities, and they will provide information on cost and payback opportunities identified. So for example, it could be to upgrade lighting to LED lighting, to replace old motors and fix air compressor leaks, install water harvesting, or to reduce waste to landfill. It's important to note, however, that for large companies, energy audits that are required under the Energy Efficiency Directive are not eligible. So the second option then under the Climate Action Voucher is an assessment of renewable energy potential. The service provider will assess the business and site's energy usage and recommend the most appropriate renewable energy systems for the business. All renewable energy technologies can be considered, including solar panels, wind turbines, heat pumps, and biomass boilers, etc. The main outcome is a register of opportunities similar to the resource efficiency assessment. The third option then under the Climate Action Voucher is an introduction to corporate sustainability. So the service provider will review the company's current performance, activities and initiatives and provide advice on developing a policy and an initial action plan. And lastly, under the Climate Action Voucher, introduction to circular economy, which means looking beyond the current take, make, waste linear economic model to a circular model that minimizes waste and pollution by design, keeping products and materials in use. So the green service provider will help the company prepare a plan to identify and develop circular economy ideas for a more circular product, process, or service. The application form is designed to be easy to complete and has an expected turnaround and approval of a number of days. It is expected that this assignment will be carried out within 6 weeks and that the outcomes will lead to further activities, further training or technical feasibility or innovation or capital projects. So it will start companies on a journey of activities. The second support is Green Start. The Green Start project cost is €6,300 and the eligible cost element is the green service provider fee, which is 7 days at €900 per day. The grant is 80%, which equates to €5,000, and the assignment period is generally over 6 to 12 months. Companies can choose a service provider from the directory of green service providers. However, this is optional. Companies may select a service provider who is not on the directory and will be approved as part of the application process. Applications are generally approved in 3 to 4 weeks. Under a Green Start, a company can implement a basic management system based on a plan, do, check, act philosophy, such as an environmental management system or an energy or a carbon management system. Or a company may carry out a short-term project on a range of different activities, ranging from carbon footprinting to life cycle assessment to sustainable logistics and sustainable strategy. We have supported a number of construction sector companies with Green Start, and we have case studies on the Enterprise Ireland website. And 2 examples are Passive Sills, who are based in Cork, and Castle Group Modular, based in Galway. So Passive Sills manufacture passive products such as window sills and oversills, and they use Green Start to learn how to do a life cycle assessment of their products so that they could generate an environmental project declaration. Castle Group Modular manufacture bespoke modular units, and the Castle Group used Green Start to develop a basic environmental management system. They identified a 56% reduction in energy usage through the installation of LED lights, and the project also helped divert tile waste from landfill. So instead of going to landfill, waste tiles will be crushed and screened and used as secondary aggregates for concrete projects. Taking things to the next level is Green Plus. Green Plus project cost is up to €100,000 and the grant is up to 50%. The eligible cost elements include the green service provider fee, which is up to €900 per day, up to 10 project team member salary costs, and salary costs of up to €200 per day can be supported, and training course fees for specialised external training courses that support the project goals. The assignment period is generally around 12 months. Similar to Green Start, the directory of green service providers is optional. Applications are generally approved in 3 to 4 weeks, and eligible projects include training the company's green team to align the company to internationalized recognized standards such as ISO 14001, the environmental management standard, ISO 50001, the energy management standard, or to frameworks or disclosure platforms such as the Science Based Targets Initiative, the SME Climate Hub, CDP, B Corps in terms of environmental sustainability, and to help the company develop long-term sustainability plans. A range of different training activities similar to Green Start can be supported under Green Plus, ranging again from carbon footprinting to life cycle assessment, to green procurement, to communications and employee and customer engagement. We have a number of Green Plus case studies on the Enterprise Ireland website, and examples include John Sisk and Sons and O'Grady's Joinery. So John Sisk and Sons availed of Green Plus to implement the energy management system ISO 50001. A structured approach to energy management was applied to all sites, and staff were engaged at all levels via toolbox talks and training. O'Grady Joinery in Mayo used Green Plus to implement both an environmental and an energy management system, so both ISO 14001 and ISO 50001. And key changes included an introduction of a new online energy monitoring system. Teams and champions were established for each area. The company installed LED lighting. The company also installed a wind turbine following on from the project, and waste segregation was improved. So this was a quick overview of the support. So I'll go to the next slide, please. And just to say, for more information on the 3 supports, go to globalambition.ie/climate action. You will see assignment guidelines for each support, the Climate Action Voucher, Green Start and Green Plus on each of their web pages. The guidelines outline the application and claims process and the eligible activities in more detail. So the supports are there to help companies get external expertise to build in-house capabilities. Green credentials are becoming more and more important, and as we've heard from the participants today, all stakeholders, from consumers to supply chain to banks, investors, regulators and employees are looking at the green credentials of companies. So we strongly encourage companies to talk to their development advisor to understand how the green supports can help them on its green journey, or to email green@enterprise-ireland.com. Finally, we are hosting a climate action funding supports webinar next week on the 30th of June for manufacturing companies. This webinar will include guest speakers from Business in the Community, Passive Sales, Automatic Plastics and the EPS Group, who will share their sustainability journey to date, as well as provide helpful advice to companies of all sizes. The webinar will be recorded, so if you register and you can't attend, you will be forwarded a recording of the event. So back to you, Dara.
Thanks, Kathleen. That's great. That's a really good overview. I'm conscious of the time. So, if you have any questions that were posted in, we'll make sure to follow up with you directly. So we're just about the end of our opening Net Zero UK session. However, I'm just going to use 2 minutes just to give a quick overview of what else is happening for the rest of this week. So tomorrow morning at 10 a.m, my colleagues John Hunt and Luke Newcomb will be joined by construction industry leaders from across the UK and Ireland to discuss their experiences of decarbonisation. This webinar will highlight the key steps of a decarbonisation journey for construction companies and what it takes for these companies to get to the start line of their own journey. The event will also launch the new Enterprise Ireland UK report, which is a path to net zero emissions, decarbonising the construction supply chain. That's at tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. Tomorrow afternoon at 3 p.m, EI UK will be joined by 3 expert panelists to discuss what the net zero transition will mean for the UK energy system. So from the increasing role of renewable energy and smart energy solutions to the decarbonisation of the heating and transport sectors. We'll discuss the timelines, technologies and the innovation required and assess the implications for the supply chain. On Thursday afternoon at 3 p.m, my colleague Laura Brockbank and I will be joined by leading voices from the UK local authority sector as we look at their pathways to zero carbon and how companies and SMEs can successfully align with the net zero goals of local government. We'll also take a close look at changing public procurement policies designed to support net zero goals. Lastly, on Friday morning at 10 a.m, EI UK will be joined by Michael Haverty of the Anderson Centre who will be on hand to deliver a comprehensive briefing and Q&A session on net zero in the agriculture sector. This will include an overview of the UK's policy drivers, including the agriculture bill, environmental bill as well. And in this session, we'll also take a look at the food industry's commitment to net zero and the implications for SMEs and suppliers working across the supply chain. So if you'd like any further information on any of these sessions, on our wider Net Zero UK campaign, or any changes in the UK market to do with net zero or sustainability, please don't hesitate to get in touch with the EI UK team. My details are on screen now, and I'll be sure to respond or put you in touch with my most relevant colleague. Just like to finish by saying thank you again for joining us for our launch session, and to sincerely thank all of our speakers once again for their time and input. So have a great afternoon and speak again very soon. Thanks and goodbye.